Getting loud? Okay, go.
Got it?
Yeah. Okay, so documentation. We all obviously know what that is and kind of what goes into that, especially for kingdom level entries. But for someone who has never done any sort of arts and science competition, where would you start?
So you're with your idea. What is it? When is it? Who, what, when, and where? As with anything, always answer those questions, right? And if you're talking about a more rigorous competition such as Kingdom A&S, I would start with the judging sheets related to what you want to enter. So are you entering a static item, a research piece, or a supported research? So I would first identify, what am I making? What do I want to enter? And which category does it fall in? And then I myself would go then look at those judging sheets and then see, is what I'm working on able to fulfill those entries? So there's several ways to look at it. Am I entering for fun? Am I entering to learn? Am I entering as just to kind of like get out there and get to know people, show my work? Am I entering as like I'm getting to the top of my art and I really am fine tuning this now, where I'm approaching it from a very more serious and more academic sort of view? So I would narrow down how do I want to approach this? What am I approaching? What sort of gaze do I have on it? And then I'd go from there, right? And how serious a person would want to be with their entry. The more serious, the more rigorously I would follow the judging sheet to ensure that I was hitting up, the more I would ensure that I was doing something that was historically as accurate as nothing can be 100% accurate, but as accurate as possible. Am I using the methods in period? Is it appropriate? Are there extant examples? Are there research examples? And I would go from there. So it would depend on what I'm up to. So for me, I'm pretty rigorous. I'm very interested in it from a very research oriented. So when I make something, I'm making sure that, is there a piece that it's similar to? Is it supported by archaeological finds? Is it true to period and region? And who would have worn it? Or in my case, who would have worn it? Because I make garb. So that's where I would start. I'd figure out, how do I want to enter? Mm-hmm. What am I trying to get? We're doing this for a reason. What are we trying to get out of it? What do we want out of it? And so if it's a less rigorous entry, then that's okay too, but you just got to know what you're going for, right? And so I'd identify, where am I and what level am I interested in? And that will dictate how serious I would like to be. The more serious I am, the more I will stick to the documentation. I will try to meet the judging sheets. I will also probably engage with other people that have entered into it before, find somebody to talk to, stuff like that. So that was a bit rambly, but that's where I would start. It's what am I up to? And does it fit for, what I want to be doing? So if you do an art that is near period, right? Like, I can't reproduce all these things. Mm-hmm. But I can do this thing. So perhaps a research type piece might be more appropriate, because then you could talk about the things that would have existed in period, and pretty much why, due to modern situation, you can't meet them, and that's okay too, or you could do a supported piece and be like, I make this thing, it's very similar to that. Just look at this, because this is in period, even though I can't create all these other things that would have been done with like things like lead or mercury or dangerous things that I would not do now, or they don't even make the equipment that would have been used or whatever. So you just kind of got to gauge where you're at in your process and what's appropriate, for you to do. Kingdom entries are always, there's just a more rigorous process. They have more rigorous judging sheets. So if you're looking to like really meet it, then you really need to hit on all the points that they're asking for. You know, like each point, so when I made my piece, I went in and looked at each point and then tried to make sure I spoke to each portion of that entry, whether or not I really wanted to speak to that or not. I made sure that I did because it was for that entry, right? So it depends on what level you're interested in and how rigorous you want to be with it. If you want to, then you start the piece by, is this something that, or you start your project based on, does it fit a who, what, where, when, and where that's appropriate? Is it supported by extant pieces? Is it supported by the research? Is it supported by imagery? Whatever it is. And usually myself, if I'm doing like an item, I want it to have multiple avenues of support. So my expectation is there's examples that are similar from grave sites or from, something that I can use as support. Then there's some imagery also, as well as some other archaeological finds supporting it. And so I'm going for a more supported item, right? Even if it's a conglomeration or coming together of multiple things, elements, but they were elements that are supported by in period for whatever it is that I'm working on. In my case, I do, I do clothing. So like shirts or something, I'm going to be very specific. I'm going to try to match the fabric. I'm going to try to match the pattern. I'm going to try to match all the elements. I'll even try using, historical, somebody has forged a needle. I found that as a rough road to go down, but I will try all those things to achieve the most period appropriate for whatever I'm working
on. Okay. I know, like, whenever I was first starting out in the essay, I say that as if I've been in here for more than a year. One of the biggest pieces preparing for an A&S entry, and especially a kingdom level entry, was receiving feedback from people who knew what they were talking about and not knowing a lot of people to go to receive that kind of feedback. So what would y'all recommend for someone brand new who doesn't know anyone? What would they do?
You can just post in your local Barony group, like just post on the Facebook, and they'll put you in contact with your local A&S coordinator, and then they might put you, and then they will help you get into contact with people that are in your area, whatever it is that you're interested in, or in the more general community. You all you have to do is put that out there, and somebody will put you in. Everybody's more than happy to share information and talk to you and provide guidance. Everybody, you can just ask, and people will be like, well, I don't work on that. I work on this thing, but I know so-and-so, and they work on that, and they would love to talk to you about that. And then they'll talk to you, and then they'll just put you on to a whole bunch of information. Or you might run into people that might not. Just try again, talk to somebody else. Because there's more than enough information out there, and everybody has different personalities, and there's a wealth of information on the internet. So I look at people's sources. Like if somebody's talking about their art or something, you can just look at what are their sources, and then that will take you to a whole world of research that exists out there. But just ask. People are more than happy to tell you all about the thing, and whatever it is, and help you find your way through the information. So I think just break it down into small chunks. Everything, break it into smaller chunks. Before you start a project, if you're entering it in something rigorous, see which way it's going to go. Like, know what you're dealing with. If you're dealing with a situation where you're making modifications because like a client wants it one way or you need it some other way, just own that at the start, and just be aware that could affect the outcome for more rigorous competitions, but not so much so for some others. So just be aware of that and reach out to somebody, and they will tell you all about it. So that would be, is just reach out to somebody in your barony and they will put you in contact with all the people that are connected out there.
Oh, absolutely. That's kind of my job now.
Yeah. So everybody in whatever barony, there's always a person that can, an A&S contact that can put you in contact with the larger group. In our barony, we have like a clothiers guild, we have woodworkers guilds, we have all the guilds. And so you can go to any of the local guild meetings. And if you just ask, people are more than happy. I mean, some people may not. I mean, that's just how it is. Some people are super friendly, some people not so much. But once you reach out, they'll put you in contact with the right people.
Mm-hmm.
I will say, if you're looking for experience in a specific crafting area, the SCA Facebook group Ask the Laurels can find someone who has research and experience and possibly ways to find tools or materials to get you started there, and might be able to help you direct your further experimentation and research. Any Laurel in general will be able to say, this is a good research practice, here's how to review a paper, but that's a way to find people who are interested in the same things you are.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I actually did not know that such a Facebook group existed, so thank you for that. I will be doing more research on that. That sounds like fun. That sounds like an info dumping playground.
Oh, yes.
Okay, so whenever you're doing a kingdom level entry, most of the time it's not going to be like, I spent a good 3 months on a project that was somewhat simple for me personally, because I can sit there and just like hyper focus. But how long do you expect someone to put time, effort, energy based on whatever they're entering?
It could be something really simple. It could be something really complicated. It all depends on what you're into and how fast you work. So I think that's all over the place. I've seen people who can produce something like, and then produce the documentation to support it, and it meets. That's just the nature of how it works, because it's all different kinds of art. It's not just it's all different kinds of arts and sciences. So it's not just, it can take you hundreds of hours to embroider something,
mm-hmm.
or go from start to finish, where somebody actually makes from the very beginning to all the way to the end to the item. Mm-hmm. And that can take years. So it runs the gamut. It just depends on what you're into. So you could go from like a simple portrait. Somebody can make a simple portraiture, although they're studied in the art and they know what they're doing and they can produce it and they know their resources already. They might go quickly, but it doesn't mean that like the years of work, it was like, so the thing may seem short, but the years of work that went into being able to understand the whole process exists that you don't see. Yeah. So something that appears to be quick could also be years of work in the background that you don't know anything about. So it's hard. That's a hard thing to measure. Like, you can't measure that in the thing, because it could take somebody, like, they've never made that before and they spent this many hours making it. And somebody who has tons of years of experience doing that might go, okay, well, that takes me a lot less time to produce, but the years of experience also measures into the thing, so it's hard. That's a hard one to measure.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. I would say any time that you spend investing in your art that brings joy to your heart is worthwhile. But at the time you start making an A&S project where you're pushing yourself purely for the A&S aspect and you're not enjoying it anymore, then it's time to reconsider whether the investment is worth it.
Yeah.
Whether you're just competing for the sake of competing.
I wouldn't do it if like, you have to be really into that part of it. I think if that's what you want to be doing, then you want to do the art, so if you don't want to do the art, don't do it.
Mm-hmm. And like, project timeout is a thing. It can go in timeout for 3 months and I can come back to it.
Yeah, nothing. This is our hobby, not our job. So,
although, okay, as far as documentation goes, I know one of my favorite pieces that I'm doing research on right now, which I know I've info dumped on, I think both of y'all at this point. But my favorite part was not being afraid to reach out to a museum, not being
Oh
afraid.
yeah. Oh yeah. No. Every researcher's paper that you see, contact that researcher, and oftentimes they will send you their paper plus more papers related to it without, because they don't make any money off of it.
Mhm.
So if you like, oh, I want so and so's article, it's in some book, just email them, and they're totally nice, and they'll send you pictures of other things. I'm constantly using Google Translate and really poor translated German and talking to people all the time. And they're always really nice and very receptive. And then they're like, well, what do you do? And then I'm like, well, go look at this stuff, on this blog. And they're like, oh my goodness. Then, yeah, that's my hobby. And then as you do that, you can just get to know more and more people. They're all humans, and they're all interested in sharing their work too. And you being excited about it makes them excited about it. So
Yeah.
I find people to be very receptive. And if they don't have time or they're not interested, they just won't reply. No big deal, just move on.
Mhm.
I'd reach out to museums. I'd reach out to other researchers, people who have blogs, from academic to non-academic resources. I would just reach out to anybody because they'll share their info. Usually they're doing it because they enjoy it and they're passionate about it or interested in it. And so then they're more than happy to share the information, and there's also opportunities through things like Patreon and stuff like that to work with people that like to have their time, to talk to them about stuff, or through what's the other one? Kofi.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Ko-fi, coffee.
Yeah, you can find artists that do research and stuff like that, or they're perfectly willing that if you want to subscribe, you can get a lot of their insight information and stuff like that. That exists too. So.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I think amateur historians get kind of a dirty rap in formal academia, but there are still a lot of historians professionally who are more than happy to share everything they do and see it put into practice in ways they might not be able to.
Yeah, and sometimes academia folks just don't even realize the rigor that some non-academics get into. Like I actually come from an academic background. So I actually just throw out there that I have degrees in other things, and I'm like, I'm a this, but as my hobby, I do this. And so then they're like, oh, okay. And then they're like, oh, let me share all these academic papers with you.
Mhm.
So you just have to talk to them. And usually people are really nice. I've never
Okay.
had an issue.
Once you figure out what it is that you want as your entry, how do you personally start on writing the actual paper? Because I know for me,
Start the
sometimes.
paper before I start the item.
Oh, wow. I do it while I'm doing it. Although recently I started doing the research prior.
Because you find you mess something up. If you're
Yeah.
doing something, if you are trying to get highest points and you're taking it seriously, I do the research first. If you are doing this because you love doing this and you want to enter this and you want to show it off, don't worry about that. Like I said, there's different levels of what you're doing. And so if you don't have to do anything, you can do it however you want to do it. Now, if you're taking it seriously and you want to do an entry that could get scored the highest amount of points, and you're trying to be like as spot on as you can to whatever it is you're trying to recreate, and you're following the whole, you're going that route, then you do it first and make sure, like, I know that this kind of linen was in this region and this time because they found it at this site, here and here. So boom, linen acquired. Okay, now I'm going to make this shirt. Okay, I know that they have a pattern for that shirt from this find and it existed in that time, and I have an image of that thing so that I know that. So okay, fine, now I can go on to the next part. And so by the time I'm making the thing, I already have all the supported parts for the thing. It's not fully written, but each part has been well thought out before I got there. But not everything requires that same level of forethought. So it depends on the project, of course, and the seriousness of what you're trying to achieve. So definitely different flavors for everybody. Everybody's welcome to do it. Like it's all different kinds need to enter.
Especially whenever you're working on like a really big project, there's always the stages that you go through. Like there's the research, and then there's the patterning, and then there's the embroidery if you're talking about like a piece of garb or something. And so like, do you think, as someone who's doing those different stages, should they go ahead and enter those in to receive remarks or advice or feedback in any capacity, even in a kingdom level event?
It depends on the person and what they feel like. Okay, so like I tend to share all the things. Like I don't hold anything to the vest. I don't, I like to put it all out there and share my research and share what I find out. Everybody's different. So it depends on the person and what they like to do and what level of feedback they're looking for.
Mm-hmm.
Like if they don't want potentially unsolicited feedback or feedback they're not interested in, maybe then they wouldn't do that. But then if you are, the more you put it out there, the more feedback you get, the more you can get out of it. So it's to each their own, what they want. But I find that people are usually very open and very sharing. And kingdoms, our local barony type contests are a great way to get feedback and to get your work out there and get people talking about it. And like, oh, hey, I saw this thing over here and I thought of you. Did you see this? And you're like, oh, no, I didn't see that. Thank you. And then you're able to go look up something you didn't even know was out there.
Yeah. I know that there's a lot of, I find events are either primarily focused on fighting or something revolving chivalric or rapier, whereas I don't see as many A&S events, which is not necessarily a bad thing, but like whenever I started, my first arts and sciences competition and the first A&S event I went to was Kingdom, and I entered in it.
Yeah,
you did great.
Baronial followed by Kingdom A&S a week later. The first thing I ever entered. I think there should be more events, and they should be of like a lot lesser rigor. Like there should be more opportunity, because I hear a lot of people are scared of documentation or scared of somebody not being nice to them when they share their work. That's a problem. Everybody should be comfortable. Like the prohibitive situation shouldn't be the documentation. The prohibitive situation shouldn't be people not being open and welcoming to all levels, right? Because this is our hobby. We're doing this for fun. It should be fun and welcoming. Everybody should be brought to the table and feel free to join. So, but the one thing about Kingdom is it is like the top one.
Yeah.
So if you jump into the deep end in that one, it might not work out. If you have no experience, you don't know that it's a more rigorous competition, right? So you're like, oh, I didn't know it was so serious. That one's serious. Yeah.
Rhonda had 2 entries at the last Kingdom event.
I remember, and they were great. I mean, so why not? I mean, but
yeah.
If you weren't aware that it was the more rigorous and the different kingdoms do it differently. So if you come to a place, you're like, oh my gosh, Anastiora is weird. They make you prep like the table, like your presentation matters. Like what? Or I've heard in some kingdoms you give a talk with your item. And we don't do that. We just have a supporting physical, which perhaps we should. Maybe it would be more welcoming to people that are less writers and more apt to verbal presentation. Like there should be potentially multiple forms of presentation. That's something that comes into consideration as well. So, but that one's just more rigorous, and there's varying levels of how seriously people are taking the competition, or what the hill is for the documentation. Very. So I think people should just try and not worry about like, so then you enter it the first time and people have feedback,
Mhm.
then you
Yeah.
get feedback. And then next time, if you can decide, oh, I'm not going to do that one because I don't like doing the level of required, or I'm going to do it anyway, and I'm just going to do what I want to do with it. And, people are still going to see my stuff. So you just
Yeah.
decide on your own. Like, I have a hard time when they're like, you can only have one sheet of documentation. I'm like, oh.
That's what I expected for Kingdom A&S. That's what I walked in with. I had essays
One
less than
sheet,
3 pages long.
because for some things, that's what is appropriate. People don't have time to read a paper related to whatever this item is, or it's not appropriate. So it just depends on what the thing is. For that particular one, it just happens to be more rigorous. But it doesn't need to be a thesis though either. Like, at the same time, if you write in a different writing style, it doesn't mean you shouldn't enter it. And it doesn't mean that you have to put it into, a more academic style either. You can write it in a more conversational style if that's how you write. So I think that more people should just enter it and not worry. It's because it's not about winning, right? It's about getting out there and showing yourself. It's nice to win. I mean, obviously, I like having something to do. Like, that's my thing. So I enjoy having something to do. That has been nice. I wear a thing, I get to go stand up there. That's kind of cool. But
if you don't win, you don't lose either. You still get feedback. The judges are going to meet with you where you are, and
people saw your art. You got it out there. Everybody enjoyed it. It's a community. It's the thing you're doing it to participate with other artisans and science types. So
Yeah, absolutely.
this isn't a grade. No matter how poorly you score, it's not going to affect you. You can always come back and do it again.
Right. It has no bearing on anything.
Speaking of scoring or documentation related to that, I come from also an academic background. I'm currently in college. I've written academic papers of wide varieties, from related to the arts to related to the STEM field. So I'm very well versed in writing a paper. But do you all, both of you, have any advice for someone who's new to the SCA, wants to try arts and sciences, wants to enter this? They've done the research, they've done the thing, they're proud of it. They have no idea how to make a paper flow, how someone's going to read it, how it reads. They've never written a research paper.
No, I would say I'm a poor recommender for. I write the most driest thesis style research papers ever. I actually have to push to write in a more conversational style. Like, I tend to write so academic, is so dry and painful that most people are like, I'm so sorry. That's how I learned how to write. I can't write the other way. I lack all creative skills in writing. Like, I have none. I'm very dry. It's very academic. You get all the information, but you're exhausted by the time you've read the whole thing, because I put so much information in there, and there's so much, like, and so et al. Found that, and you're just like, oh my goodness. So I don't have good, I'm not good there. I can't offer anything helpful other than how to, I would ask somebody. If you're really concerned about it, I would ask somebody and let them kind of guide you, or maybe give you some examples, and then go from there.
Mm-hmm.
And literally, if you took the grading sheet and just did it by the grading sheet, you'd probably be fine.
Yeah.
Even if it didn't flow and it did nothing else, and you just made sections that matched the grading sheet, you would probably be fine, because it tells you exactly what they're trying to find in your document. So if you just organize it like that, they'll be able to find everything that you're trying to put out there. But I'm the opposite. I'm no good for this one.
I find I like to, even if I include the documentation of where the extant garment was from, what style of stitches was used, the dye methods that went into it. That was, my most recent research piece. I went severely into dye methods. But I find even if you include that, I personally prefer more of a conversational style, and I try to not throw in a bunch of things that someone may not understand, because I was informed that a lot of times someone reading your paper may not have a background in whatever you did research on. So if you get too technical, you may lose them, but if you don't get technical enough, you're not explaining it properly. So I find that there's sometimes kind of a fine line, especially like if you're doing like a baronial level event compared to a kingdom level event. I'd want to be more technical at the kingdom level. But one way I find that if my paper is less than 20 pages, I will copy paste it into Google Translate in sections and have it read it back to me. And if I don't like the way that it sounds, I will edit it just so it reads better to the person who's trying to, read it.
Yeah, that sounds like a great idea. I did that a lot when we were working translations. I also come from an academic background, but I also worked as a middle and high school teacher, teaching people how to start to write. And looking at a paper like this, I would think, this is just a story. Tell us where you started off, how you got this idea, what steps you went through as you researched and as you made your object, or as you researched and then came to a conclusion. And at the end, tell us what you learned and why this matters to your future research. If you have all of those things, you've probably hit most of the points on the rubric. But going through and double checking that all of those boxes have been checked will give you a nice round conversational paper.
I feel like you just quoted exactly how my paper went.
Yeah. Circling back to the write it like the person doesn't know anything about what you're writing about. That I will say. If you are explaining a technique, you are explaining it like they are going to try to do it after you.
Yeah.
Like they are going to try, you want to write it like they are going to try to do it, and they know nothing about what you're talking about. So don't make any assumptions of some base knowledge level, because it might be a person that does not do that art. And so you have to approach it like they don't know anything about what you're doing. And you're going to write it in such a way that if they needed to do it, they could do it. They'll know all the who, what, where, and how, like all of it. Like they need to know all of it. So if you say, I did a running stitch, what's a running stitch? That like you have to explain like even the most basic of things. So I would say explain like basic, very like straightforward, easy to understand that you did, so that that you hit all those points. That is definitely a thing.
Yeah.
Approach it like nobody knows what you're talking about.
Yeah. I remember just like I said in my piece that I sewed this together. And then someone asked me, what kind of stitch did you use? I'm like, I got no idea. I put it together. I know how to sew. And they're like, I don't. I got no idea how to sew.
The first Laurel who judged a piece of my work was a Laurel in cooking and did not know how to sew at all. And that formed how I write.
So always approach it like they don't know anything about the topic. And particularly not just how to do it, but where. Who, like to you, or to me, talking about 16th century, early 16th century Germans is like perfectly normal, like thing to discuss about what they would have had clothing wise and stuff like that. But to somebody else, they have no idea what you're talking about. So you got to treat it. Start from the beginning, broad, and then narrow in, and then be very specific and cover each point.
Absolutely.
If you're having trouble with that, with the number of like foreign words or the number of terms you have to define, you can always put a glossary at the back and put in your writing, refer back to the glossary, so it doesn't interrupt your flow of your writing.
Yeah, I'm a huge glossary. My glossary was bigger than my paper. So, and was multi-chaptered, because I don't want to spend 2 pages making the person read about changes in, clothing style in the region due to a shift of the seat of the Holy Roman Empire, you know, like, but I can discuss that in the appendix, take it or leave it, and just reference it. Say, you know, style change due to, you know, see appendix A for more info, you know, and like in the appendix, I threw in things like a map and like just to give an idea to support more of what I talk about without going too far into it in the part that they're trying to get through to grade your item, to be able to judge your item. But then for the people that are really interested, then they go, ooh, and then they go and go read that, and then they're excited about it. So if you have information like that, you can include it.
Mhm.
Like you said, put it in an appendix, and people will love to see it, you know.
I was really sad I didn't have time to read your entire paper because the people who were judging were coming up right behind me. I'm like, I gotta stop reading. No.
No, nobody, not even the reviewers didn't really have time to read my stuff. So, and that's okay, because I have like, it's part of my other, you know, like it's a larger hobby. Like that research and information stuff is like, my hobby is not just, my craft is not just the clothing. It's also the research. So, and not everybody is like that. Some people are looking to make the thing, and they're doing the minimal amount to make the thing, which is perfectly acceptable, perfectly fine. So don't feel like you have to suddenly become a researcher to produce the thing either. If you want to produce the thing, make the thing. You know, I just happen to go more toward the unnecessary amount of reading in a language I don't even speak. So
Same. I'm slowly learning German actually, just by proxy.
yeah. I don't know why I picked that, because it's painful, but
It is a little bit painful, honestly.
I'm like, why am I doing? There's no English translation. What am I doing here? This is like it's not even in like modern German. Don't even know what this word is. Oh well, I'll ask somebody.
Yeah, the museum I contacted sent me the restoration notes that was published, but they also put the name of the person who did the restoration. Like, that person's still alive, and I haven't found their contact information yet, but I'm looking for it.
Yet.
Yeah.
Goodness. Where else?
And I have a question for you. As someone still relatively new to Anstiora, you just mentioned that you had things you were strong at and you fuddled your way through the things you weren't that interested in. Do people ever do A&S projects where they work together and collaborate and enter them as a pair?
They have like Iron Chef style stuff, but I've never seen anybody do a collab for like a finished project. But I also am relatively new to the SCA, so I've only been around since I started attending like clothing guild meetings like a long time ago, but I didn't get involved probably until like 2019 myself. So and it was right at the start of the pandemic. So I haven't seen a ton myself. I'm actually not that
remember
levered.
Yeah, I got to overhear a lot of Laurel's talking whenever they were judging and everything. And I hope it was okay that I like listened in on occasionally. But it seemed like it was okay for someone to help in a manner that was not being judged. So if, for example, you were like, your Laurel friend helped you put together, like, say, a piece of garb, and you were just being judged on the embroidery or the black work, and there you were not specifically being judged on the entire piece, that was accepted. Whereas if you were being judged on the entire piece, I don't know if the grading criteria or if you would be docked because you didn't actually do all of it.
Yeah, I don't know how collabs. I mean, I think it should be, because some people are specialists, and like, I don't see why there couldn't be any reason why you can't get two people that are both.
I want to find out that answer now.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I think it would be really cool to see a collab competition where people work together to put their specialties to their best uses
yeah,
and
I
make
know
something
there's
even
like
better.
Iron Chef style, but it's usually, I think, like random, not like a it's like you have a table of this stuff and do this thing. Less so than like this person specializes in weaving of some sort, and this person specializes in this type of garb that's appropriate for that type of weaving, and voila, you have produced, very appropriate thing for the time and period. I haven't seen it, which would be awesome.
That would be so
Yeah,
awesome.
Yeah.
I might suggest that.
Also, it would make hand sewing a little less monotonous.
Yeah.
If you didn't have to sew the entire piece yourself.
Did you see my Facebook picture the other day? That's all I do.
Well, I'm about to start a project that I'm like having to teach myself how to weave because I'm going to make the fabric because I'm bonkers. And I really wanted to do a giant project that would take me years and years because I did the hand sewing thing. I'm like, okay, I want to do more.
I would like, I think I said like I always, something I recommend to people is mini versions, swatches, tests. Do it more than once before you set like a lot of times we see the thing and we go, oh, I want to do that, and you take off a very large bite, and that can be really overwhelming and can make it so that you don't get to enter things because you're always working on this one thing that is a lot that never gets, maybe never completes. So I'm very big on like very agile type project management. I pick something, I keep it in scope, I stick to the plan, and then I execute the plan. And sometimes it goes down a road that it's not where I want to end up, or I'm not happy, but it's small enough that I could then throw that aside and start something different. And it's not like crushing that I screwed up something that I've been working on, if it's related to a competition, like something that I know I want to enter, right? So I make things all the time that like put down, pick up, put down, pick up, put down, pick up. But usually those are outside of like what I might do to enter into something. Just because usually I'm like, I want to do something fresh every year because I enjoy doing it.
Yeah. I find for large projects, it's really nice to break it down into smaller goals. So like if you're doing a ginormous project like I'm about to embark on, where you're going to make the very fabric you use to make the eventual garment, and you're going to learn how to do a specific style of embroidery, and you're going to do exactly the pattern that was used in period. You break it down into steps. So first things first, I have to teach myself how to weave a brocade because my goodness. And then I have to, while I'm learning, getting comfortable with the loom, I'm also teaching myself how to embroider. And like those different milestones, you can break it down into almost like an individual paper in and of itself. So like the eventual piece I'm working on is both a chemise with darning embroidery as well as the outer gown, and it will be put together in one final piece that will probably take me between 3 and 5 years to complete because it's just ginormous. And my goodness, until you embark on a hand sewing project, you don't know how long that's actually going to take. But I find that breaking it down into, okay, this year I'm going to do the pattern for the underdress, and I'm going to work on the embroidery while I learn this skill that I've never done before, but I want to do it as close to period as possible. So I'm going to learn this new skill and then embark on the bigger project of that skill that you've learned and you have a little bit more experience with, and pushing that further and eventually developing the piece. That's kind of also how I write my papers, even if I do all the research prior. I like it to flow with the timeline of whatever it is that I'm making, just so people can see the progression. And one day, whenever I get this ginormous project finished, I want to do like almost a multimedia where I'm going to do a video of how I learned everything, as well as the paper, as well as the garment, and people can see the entire progression. And that's something I didn't see last year. With
any video entries. I've seen video entries before.
It wouldn't surprise me if someone's done it before, but like,
yeah, they're very neat. I've seen like a really neat one that was like interactive too, where you could like click around in the video on the things, and then it would like link to the other things, and that was pretty cool.
Neat.
Yeah.
That does absolutely sound like a thesis that you're writing, and every part of it could be a separate paper, and I applaud you.
Yeah, see, I would probably say, okay, I'm gonna make the smock, okay, and then I would totally make that and do that's one thing, and then I would say I'm making the fabric. Totally make the fabric, and then that would be another unit. So publishable units is what it would end up being. So I would have separate publishable units, and then when it's all done, then you can do like a big introduction that is for your overall parts, and then a big conclusion at the very end, and then you have all these units that exist, which I've seen. There's a somebody from back east did like all this pleat work, and they have it's a book now. It's basically a book on Germanrenaissance.net, and they have their pleat work book. It's a book. It's a full book with multiple chapters. Yeah.
I'm just imagining the flex of you showing up to that final event with the finished product and laying out all of the papers that you've written to support this one item. The just one on embroidery, the one chapter. Yeah.
That's what synopses are for, right?
Exactly. You have an abstract at the beginning.
Yeah.
Oh, that sounds actually really fascinating. And now I'm blanking on the next thing I was gonna say. I've only entered one piece into a kingdom level event, because I've only ever attended one kingdom level event. But
me too.
I've done two. So I got you beat.
One thing that, like, especially because I joined the SCA post-COVID, and I am still getting to know people and what their specialties are, and like, please info dump on me. Always info dump on me. I always like learning what people are passionate about. But going into Kingdom, I was told several things that just kind of made me scared to do actually a Kingdom level event. I was terrified, and I told several people this, that the Laurels were going to rip my paper apart piece by piece. And obviously that is not true, because several people were like, if that happens, please let me know, because I would like to have a talk with that person.
Yeah, but a lot of that.
Yeah, but for
attitude, but I've never experienced it. So I don't know if that's like a historical precedence that was set up at some point. But nobody's ever had anything really negative. I've never ran into anybody that was particularly harsh on anything. I think even the edits I did receive, because I welcome them, were minimal things that I was already aware of. They're like, oh, this here, and it's like, yeah, I knew that one. You know, I was tired of getting this done at this point, you know, whatever. Or yeah, I know I should have did that. So I haven't ran into that. So I don't know where that comes from. I don't know if there was some people before involved or what. I don't know.
I know that all the Laurels that I spoke to and that gave me constructive feedback and gave me advice about doing a paper in the future were like, one, sewing Laurels. So like, I got to have all the conversations, and I ran out of time with all of them. But they all provided constructive feedback and actually took the time to talk with me about the choices that I made. And another reason not to write paper as you're doing the thing is that you sometimes forget to put into the paper why you did the alteration you did that wasn't period. So for example, I was doing a men's doublet and I altered it to fit a woman's body, and I think I put that in there, but I forgot to put that I was also altering it to be rapier legal because I wanted to be able to wear it on the rapier field. And so I elongated the torso to cover more area. And I forgot to put that in the paper. And luckily, someone who was within the rapier community was just like, I think she did this for this reason. But yeah, I forgot to put that in there.
Which totally happens. Anytime you take it, like that falls under the deviation. If you're entering into a more rigorous competition with more rigorous rubric for judging, then you want to speak. Like I put like a little asterisk thing after every single thing that is not. Like, I subbed arrowroot in lieu of starchwort because starchwort's a new world plant that's available commercially in a starch powder form, and I did not grow the plants myself. Please see my appendix D for some ridiculously long starching article, like, so each little thing, each little substitution, if it's a more rigorous competition and you're looking to score all the points, then you speak to all that stuff. So, and so that would be like an example. You would say, the intended wearer of the garment, wants to use this for this, so I went ahead and did this.
Yeah.
And that's it. That's all you have to say. You don't have to go into it beyond that. Just stating it is all you have to do.
Yeah.
Like I ran out of forged needles because I broke them all. So I switched to my Bohemian commercially available lovely needles, which is probably, in the time I worked in, they probably had pretty nice. I mean, the fines are pretty nice needles. You just can't find anybody producing those, in a non-commercial sense. So voila, I went with this. That's what I'm doing. And that's it. That's all you have to just speak to it. And they just want you to speak everything, to every single little thing, like all the deviations, even if you think it's, oh, they'll know, or, oh, it's not a big deal. That's why they have that, they're grading it for that, looking for that to do.
Yeah.
I've had similarly, I've been grilled by a Laurel who saw that I had a high level of sewing skill, but I had never sewn a historical garment before. And so she was asking me all about these period sewing techniques that she thought I understood and I didn't. And that was a very challenging experience for both of us. But looking back, I know she was well-meaning. Mm-hmm. She really wanted me to push my art, and she thought I was at a level that I wasn't because I was using modern cheats to recreate the look.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I guess that would be a thing, is understanding everybody's just humans all doing. Mm-hmm. We don't know, sometimes you don't know the other person, you don't know why they did something, or even why they're asking you something, so you can always touch, like, why are you, I actually come from this. I think the first event I did that was the Laurel's prize tourney. I don't know if you've heard about those. I recommend those if you can go to that. You take all your stuff, they're minimal documentation, you just lay it all out there, and the Laurels will come talk to you. Mm-hmm. So it's just kind of like a more of open event, right? It's a great time to make those connections and like start that conversation, and a good opportunity. So for somebody who's starting out, if you can attend that event and you're interested in A&S, that's a great event to attend. And you just show your stuff, just set it up. Because I think the first year I went, I had just started with the SEA, and I had a whole bunch of stuff that I had done. And so if anything, I confused people more because I had all this stuff, and they're like, where are you from? What are you doing? You're just some person with this as your hobby and unrelated to SEA. How does that happen? And then you just explain, and then it's like, oh, okay, that makes sense. But the assumption, I think we all make assumptions based on what we see. We all do it. So I think you see something and you think, oh, that person has experience in this. And you're like, no, actually, I don't know anything about this. Yeah, I happen to do this other thing over here that is similar but different. So, oops. So I had a similar where I had to explain a lot, that like, they're like, oh, so do you have your this or that? And I was like, I don't even know what you're talking about. What is happening over there? I don't even know. So, and then after that, but then over time, as you attend things and ask things, and people get to know you, and you learn more, and people understand more where you're coming from.
Mhm.
But I can totally see that happen where somebody sees your stuff and they're like, that looks really good. Why did you do that? You should do this. And you're like, what?
I had never hand sewn in my life at that point, other than like random Girl Scout embroidery projects. I didn't know. But it really helped me push my art, if only because I was offended that I'd been grilled at an A&S event. I needed to do better.
Oh, no, 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 no.
I love that pushed you, but my goodness. I think there's also an expectation of like someone who hasn't done multiple projects or may not know that whenever you're doing something by hand, no matter what art it is, whether it's sewing, whether it's painting, calligraphy, forge work, leather work, imperfections are normal and expected, especially whenever you're doing something in period. And there's always the crafters. What was it? The silk loom weavers in period would purposely put a mistake, even if it was the like smallest, minutest detail, so their soul would not get trapped in whatever piece they were working on. But I think that a lot of people who are new, who have not ever done a project, come into like a competition with the idea that everything has to be perfect. Like I was looking at my hand stitches and I'm like, these are not even. These are not as even as my machine. I'm like, duh, I did it by hand.
Well, yeah, and it might not actually be appropriate for whatever time and place you're doing it for. Like, so there's a whole element of our modern gaze effects. So that's the first that's a big recommendation actually I have for anybody is challenge your assumptions of your modern gaze. Like, are you biasing shape, form, color based upon your modern preconceived notions of whatever that thing is supposed to be? And I think sewing is particularly like that because a lot of historical garb was sloppily sewn. Like our hand sewing, I think it's kind of based off of turn of the century or Victorian ideals, which is a very serious and very controlled, tight, beautiful stitch work. Whereas it's not. But then there's the exception, where you got like smocks and hems, which were sewn with great precision, even at the same time where you had more roughly sewn things from tailors. So I would definitely challenge your modern gaze of fit and color and what something's supposed to be.
Oh yeah. And especially with some depictions of things in period, like I hate to use this as an example, but like a movie about the Three Musketeers is not going to be what something was in period, but it's what someone who doesn't have the historical knowledge is going to be exposed to prior to joining an organization like the SCA.
Yeah. We all come in with the modern gaze. I mean, and some people always maintain that, and that's okay too, if that's what you want to get out. Like you don't have to. I'm just, if you are trying to take it to another level, then that's something you want to apply. I know it's like something that I challenged myself to dial in on, is to try to get out of the idea that I want to make it fit or have some biases that I have based on my modern ideas of what I think things should be as to not what they were.
Well, it's like I do a lot of research into Italian men's fits where they would purposely want a pouted or large belly to show off their wealth, that the fact that they can afford food, and so they're considered fat by today's standards. But I despise it. I hate it. I don't want it on my body. So I alter almost every double I make to be more modern because it does not have the codpiece. It does not have the belly padding. It does not have that because that's simply something I don't like to construct.
Right, but it's important to be comfortable too, like, so you do what you're comfortable doing. And I think you should definitely do that first. But if you're making something and you're trying to go for as historically accurate as possible, then you have to go, okay, I'm going to stick to whatever the pattern was, because that's how it was. I have a book that literally shows the pattern for the tailors from that time. So I'm just going to use this pattern and not modify it. But if it's something that I'm going to wear, then I might take liberties and then just own it. Just be like, I did this because I was making it for so-and-so, and they don't want it to look ill-fitted. They like this fit, or they like ease of use, or they have some reason. Reason why they like it this way, and that's okay too.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, the biggest accommodation I have in that vein, you probably are familiar with, Aldora. If you use the period Renaissance patterns, the sleeves are not supposed to be attached to the doublet, but the rapier fighting nowadays, it has to be attached to the doublet. There can't be a gap. So you have to adjust the arm side and the sleeve attachment so there's enough room for the rapier fighters to move their arms when they fight. Because if you just take the period sleeve pattern and stick it in the period arm side, it's so stiff you can't lift your shoulders. So something you document, you research, but it's never going to be totally accurate when it's in practice.
Well, just like many people will use tie-on sleeves for decoration when oftentimes they were pinned on, and you can't have a metal pin if you're on a rapier field. And there's different, deviations that we make for that reason, that just make it more easier for whoever is intended to use whatever we're making or whatever we're displaying, makes their life easier. That's the intended goal, even if you have to document that and make things, indexes.
Yeah, own it is all. I just own it. If I take a deviation or I'm doing something different, I just say it. And if somebody has a problem with that, then that's nothing I can do for them.
And a lot of times someone who's just beginning a paper like that may not know that they're deviating until they receive that feedback and they're like, oh, I didn't know that's how that was supposed to be done. Now I do, and I can move on from that, which is why I really, really like being able to put into my paper, like, not only the deviations I made, but what I learned as a result of it after it's been in either one or two entries. And I'm like, here's, things I've learned.
Yeah, I like in my work, I put like a reflection area.
Yeah.
Like where I after my conclusion, or kind of do some conclusion stuff, what worked. And then I say, well, although I did the sleeve this way, I'm not happy, even though this, that, or the other. And I think I would do it this way next time because it just would make more sense, And so I think that I almost think my personal bias is like that. I think that's more important almost than the other stuff that I did. Like, yes, I created this pretty thing, but for me, it's the dialing in on the thing itself. Like, I'm doing this because I am trying to dial in on this thing and make it as close to whatever, and as close to this idea of perfection that I have. I'm not doing it to receive any sort of like, oh, that's great. It's like, I don't care. It's pretty. I want it to be right. And so like, I'm dialing it in to get it right. So I almost think that those reflections are more important. So I'm more concerned, like, a good example is the shirt that I made. There was problems with it. And so like, I clearly put those out in front, and then I turned it into a whole thing where I just talked for a long time about those things, right? Where I was like this and that, and then I thought about this, and then I couldn't find that, and it's not right, because I felt that it was important to point that out, so that if somebody else looks at it and they go, it's pretty, I'm going to make it. No, don't make it like just because I made it doesn't mean that it's right. You might want to consider this other thing over here. And so to me, it was important to put the the research became just as important as the thing to
Mhm.
talk about how it might be done more correctly.
Yeah, I like that.
Because we're all learning. None of us have a time machine. None of us know. I mean,
If one's ever invented, I'd love to go in it.
well, and people
With
egregiously abuse research. We all have biases based on our region. There's regional styles in historical reenactment. So we don't see it. We don't realize that it's there, but then we see everybody doing a style, and then next thing you know, it becomes a thing, and it was never even a thing when you look at actual at other research. So that's always something to keep in mind, is like that it's all highly subjective, so for me, the more I learn from it, that's the part I'm going for. It's like, okay, although this worked and looks like it could be this, doing it, it doesn't seem like it would have been that. And it turns out this didn't show up until like 10 years later. So it probably wasn't that at that time, because that didn't show up until then. And then you can just dial it in more if you want to do it again. So for me, that's the part I enjoy.
Absolutely. I actually surprisingly have run out of questions.
All right.
Any further advice that we haven't covered yet, or just something that you feel like people should know entering into a competition?
Just enter.
Just enter.
Just do it. Don't be worried about what anybody says or what they think or what other people tell you. Just enter.
Speaking of entries, can you actually enter Kingdom with a similar or same piece more than once?
No.
No.
Not the same piece. Similar. Like if you're continuing to just dial in something, show that every year, and then just go over every time everything you've changed about it to make it not the same piece, but like, I made this again, and this time I did these other things because I feel like this is more accurate based upon this evidence or these things over here. Like, yeah, go for it. Like, I make the same thing. I make versions of the same thing all the time because I'm dialing in on something. Like, I'm trying to get to a point where I'm feeling like I'm hitting the mark more. So I'm all about the accuracy, So I don't just want precision. I'm not just trying to get in the same grouping. I'm trying to get closer to the target the whole time. So to me, I think it would be perfectly fine if you enter, like, I made this shirt this way this year, but I made it this way this year. It's the same style, looks like the same, but here are all the things that are different.
Cool.
But you might get bored. That might be boring. You're like, oh.
Isn't that how specialties develop, though? Raya, do you have anything to add or anything to ask?
I would add that for anyone looking at just starting doing A&S documentation, the Kingdom website under the A&S tab has like a dozen pages that list off research resources and have example documentation papers to read and all of the rubrics that you can use to check off as you reread your papers before submitting them. And they also have contact info. If you can't reach anyone in your barony, you can reach out to the Kingdom A&S ministers who will know people to help.
Yeah, excellent advice.
I had forgotten about that. I remember whenever Kingdom A&S was approaching last year, the Kingdom Minister of Arts and Sciences sent out, email of, check the judging sheets, contact me if you have any questions because I'm not judging this year. And so that was really awesome to be able to be like, okay, I can reach out to this person and I'm not taking up their time and being not like a waste of space, because I don't want to say something like that, but of not feeling like I'm still learning. So I would not want to have someone who knows vastly more than myself look at this piece and be like, oh, this is all the things that you can. In my head, it's always all the things that you've done wrong rather than all the things that you can improve on, and moving forward, here's what you can learn from that. It's always, I have to turn out of that headspace personally.
like criticism is not criticism, but like we take input for growth a lot of times as criticism. I think it's kind of cultural. So so if you don't have a background where people provide input to grow something, it can be hard to, if you've never experienced that, if you've only ever experienced that with a very negative. But I think if you tell people, like, I feel I'm prone to like take things, as very serious, they might adjust like the way they communicate with you. So definitely if you have like particular, like you're prone, if you wear things too very underneath the vest, if you say that, then I think people would be particular about that.
Oh yeah, I
Like,
remember
more careful, like if you're prone to that.
well, like whenever it was my very first A&S entry ever was also Kingdom, because like that's where I happened to start. I remember walking accidentally past, I was trying to avoid as they were sitting around my entry, and overhearing, this is her first paper, this is her first anything, take that with a grain of salt. And I'm like, I'm running away now. But it can be a little not scary, but intimidating going into something where people have put, someone is going to have a project where they've worked on for so long, and they're like, yes, I finally get to display this. And then you have someone who's like, I made this just to be able to enter today, and I really want feedback, and I want to learn how to do arts and sciences. There's both levels of spectrum, and I feel like the people who do grade and judge A&S, especially at Kingdom level, are very good at telling not only that, but providing the constructive criticism needed to keep people's interest within A&S. And I really, really enjoy that about what I saw last year at Kingdom A&S. And that was really cool.
I know everyone at a Kingdom A&S will have experience with a high school grading scale. And I would like to take a second to put that in a little bit of perspective for an A&S. Because if you imagine that a third grade science fair project, a high schooler with their capstone project for chemistry, and a master's student candidate are all presenting in the same science fair, the numbers they get on their papers aren't what matters. The feedback you get for where you are in your journey, you're going to get that personally from the judges, and that's what really matters. Absolutely. The number is just a pace for you to jump off of.
The person you should be competing against is yourself.
Bingo.
So you can't compare yourself to anybody else, because that's not your competitor. Your competitor is you. So yeah, you set the goal, and then you just try to meet your goal, whatever that is. And unfortunately, some of us are like, I set my goal up here. I'm really tired now. But so that happens. But if you are not a type of person that likes to set harsh goals on yourself, then you don't have to. Yeah. And I wouldn't try to measure myself against somebody that does either.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the biggest thing people need to take into any A&S competition, not just Kingdom, is the idea of the mindset of growth, whether that's you're learning, you're getting connections to people who know more than yourself, you are finding resources that you didn't have access to before, or you finally heard back after 6 months of waiting from someone that you contacted, and they're like, oh, I finally checked my email, here's a paper that gives you additional information that you don't have time to put into that report because it's the next day. It can be just always try to grow and not beat yourself up about something you don't have experience in or you're still learning. And like, I started out going from an inkle loom to a 6'4" loom, and I'm still learning how to warp that. So I'm trying to put that into perspective, and I think people need to realize that as well, that like going from one piece that you know a little bit about to an entire arts and sciences project may be a learning experience that you're going to stumble a little bit along the way, but as long as you keep growing and you keep pushing and you keep that passion and that interest, because this is a hobby and we are all trying to go towards that same dream of, this is something I like doing and I like learning this thing. Like Raya said earlier about, as long as you have a passion for it, keep pushing. If you ever find that interest waning, put it in timeout. And if you come back to it, great. If you don't, it's okay. But I think that's everything I planned on talking about. Thank you both for joining me today. I really appreciate your time and input, and I'm so excited for this upcoming Kingdom A&S, even if it's a little faster than I thought it was going to be too.
Yeah.
Yeah, I forgot about it until Barony of A&S. No.
Well, I was trying to time this meeting to about roughly 2 months before Kingdom. So anyone who wanted to look at this or come to the actual meeting would be able to ask questions and have input. But they'll get to see the recording. So, yeah.
I have submitted a proposal to teach a similar class at Kingdom for anyone who sees the displays and is inspired to get started. So,
if you would like a copy of this recording, I can, whenever it's processed through the cloud and through everything, I can send you a link to it if you'd like.
yes, please.
No. Dear God, no.
But I hope just like things like this will promote further interest within arts and sciences, because I know within the STA, the showy things are fighting, and that kind of draws that kind of community. Whereas like I started as a rapier fighter and my primary thing is still rapier fighting. I just also happen to love learning and I love doing things and I like having my hands busy. So that was what drew me into the arts and sciences side of the STA. And as I learn more, the more I become interested in the morning. I'm like, I'm going to go dive into a 5-year-long project whenever I've only been doing this for a year. That's just my brain. That's how it works. People think I'm insane. Ta-da! But A&S doesn't always get that showstopper thing of, look at this, whenever something may take weeks, months, even years to create, whenever you're talking about, basing something off a next garment. Sometimes people don't get to see that side of the SCA, and it may seem slightly intimidating, especially whenever you get into documentation and research methods and everything else. Things take a long time. They don't get that instant gratification of being able to hold a sword in your hand and stabbing someone in the face.
On the other hand, the progress you make in A&S is a lot more concrete than the progress you make in fighting. You get to see that item that you hold in your hands and compare it to the ones you made before and watch your growth in real time. And you don't always see that when you're fighting.
Mm-hmm. As well as the fact, like, the physical feedback you receive. Like, I have my A&S feedback sheets from Kingdom, and I'm like, that's something I can immediately put to use. Whereas like rapier, it's, oh, you're not turning your foot in properly, or you're going to blow out your knee if you keep doing that. And so it's harder to see that. And you're absolutely right. There's so many different avenues of this dream that we live and this hobby that we have that I'm like, every event I go to, I'm like, I love seeing everyone, I love talking to people and just learning. My favorite pastime, my ladies, is as well, is oral info dumping. Please, please, please tell me about your thing. The more you tell me about it, the more I'll be like, yes. On that note, we are, actually an hour and a half almost. So I'm going to go ahead and stop this recording.